Sophia had a body made for sin, soft curves that fit perfectly against me, skin that burned beneath my touch, and lips that trembled whenever I claimed them. She smelled like wild jasmine, intoxicating and delicate, and the way she looked at me, with those dark, knowing eyes, made it impossible to resist her. That night I didn't hold back. She lay beneath me, her breath hitching as my fingers traced lazy circles along her bare skin. The dim glow of the bedside lamp cast golden shadows over her body, highlighting the way she arched into me, surrendering to my every movement. "Ethan," she whispered, voice breathless, needy. I silenced her with a kiss, deep and consuming, my hands tightening around her waist as I pulled her closer. Her fingers tangled in my hair, nails pressing lightly against my scalp, sending waves of fire through me. She was warm, soft in mine. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat between us, the tangle of limbs, the gasps and sighs that filled the room like a melody only we could hear. Every kiss, every touch, was a promise, a silent vow that we belonged to each other, here and now. And yet there was something else in the way she held me, a desperation, as if she was afraid to let go. I should have noticed it sooner. Much later, after our bodies were spent and the night had settled into a quiet hum, I lay beside her, tracing idle patterns along the small of her back. Her breathing was steady, her body relaxed against me, but I could tell she wasn't asleep. "Move in with me," I murmured. She stiffened, just for a fraction of a second. If I hadn't been holding her, I might have missed it. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice light, teasing. But there was something underneath it, something careful. I turned onto my side, propping myself up on one elbow, so I could see her face. "Of course, I'm sure." Her gaze met mine, unreadable. Then she smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'd love to." I kissed her forehead, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. I had everything I wanted, a thriving business, a beautiful woman who set my soul on fire, and now, the promise of a future together. Nothing could ruin this, or so I thought. The next morning, Sophia was still asleep when I slipped out of bed and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up with missed calls and emails. Work never stopped. But one name stood out from the list. "Mom." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face before finally calling her back. She picked up on the first ring. "Ethan." I frowned. She sounded tense. "Morning, Mom. We need to talk." My stomach tightened at her tone. My mother was a strong woman, cold, composed, never one to show unnecessary emotion. But right now I could hear something in her voice, something that almost sounded like fear. "About what?" "It's about Sophia." My entire body went still. "What about her?" There was a pause, and then, in a voice sharper than steel, she said, "You need to end things with her." I let out a dry laugh. "You can't be serious." "I am." Something about the way she said it, so firm, so absolute, made my blood run cold. "Mom, you don't even know her." "I know enough." I clenched my jaw. "This is my life. I love her." Another pause. A breath. And then, "Ethan, listen to me. Stay away from her." There was something almost desperate in her voice now. My mother never pleaded, never begged. A slow unease crept up my spine. "Why?" I demanded. She didn't answer right away. And when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because she's dangerous." The word sent a chill through me. I didn't know what scared me more, the warning itself, or the fact that, deep down, I already suspected she was right. That night, I lay beside Sophia, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as she slept. The conversation with my mother replayed in my mind over and over again, twisting into something I couldn't ignore. There were too many things about Sophia I didn't know. She never talked about her past, never mentioned her family. Every time I tried to ask, she brushed it off with a smile, a kiss, a distraction I was all too willing to accept. But now, the doubt had settled in, thick and unshakable. I needed answers. The next day, while she was in the shower, I found myself standing in front of her closet, My heart pounded as I reached for the small, locked box tucked in the corner. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy. But I also knew that whatever was inside this box, it would change everything. I found a key in the drawer beside her jewelry and carefully unlocked the box. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, there were papers, documents, old photographs, and then my breath caught. A birth certificate. My hands went cold as I read the name under Mother. Catherine Sterling. My mother's name. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My vision blurred, my pulse pounded in my ears. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence, but deep down, I already knew the truth. Sophia wasn't just some woman I had fallen in love with. She was my mother's daughter. She was my sister, and she had known all along. I couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, suffocating. My hands trembled as I clutched the birth certificate, my mind reeling. My mother's name was there, clear as day, printed in black ink. Sophia was her daughter, my sister, and she had known all along. I forced myself to move, to put the documents back exactly as I had found them. The last thing I needed was for Sophia to know what I had just discovered. My thoughts were racing, crashing into each other like a violent storm. Why? Why would she do this? I closed the box, locked it, and placed it back in the closet, then slipped out of the bedroom just as the sound of running water stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands clammy with sweat. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without a word. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mother's voice replaying in my head. Stay away from her. She knew. She had known all this time, but instead of telling me the truth, she had only given me vague warnings. She had let me walk straight into this nightmare, blind and unsuspecting. I finally pulled over at a quiet park, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breaths were shallow, uneven. I tried to remember every moment with Sophia, every glance, every touch, every whispered confession. Had she been playing me from the start? Or had she ever, even for a second, felt something real for me? I wanted to scream. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring. "Ethan, you knew," I said, my voice shaking. A long silence. Then, softly, "You found out." I let out a bitter laugh. "You could have told me. You should have told me." Her breath wavered. "I didn't know how. I thought if I kept you apart, you would never find out." Anger burned through me. "You let me fall in love with her. I tried to stop you. Not hard enough." She exhaled shakily. "I didn't know she would come for you, Ethan. I thought," she hesitated. "I thought she had moved on." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean, come for me?" Another pause. "Then, she knows exactly who she is. And she knows exactly who you are. She's not with you by accident." My stomach turned. I had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it real. Why would she do this? My voice was hoarse. "Because I left her." I gripped the phone tighter. "Explain." My mother sighed, and for the first time in my life, she sounded truly broken. "She was a mistake, Ethan. I was young, foolish. I had an affair with a man I shouldn't have. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't keep her. Your father, he would have never forgiven me. I did what I thought was best." My head spun. "You abandoned her." "I made sure she was taken care of," she whispered. "I paid the orphanage. I gave them money to give her a good life." Rage twisted inside me. "You threw her away like she was nothing." Silence. And then, "I regret it every day." I wanted to believe her, but it didn't change anything. I swallowed hard. "And now, she's back." "Yes." "To destroy you." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. When I returned home, the apartment was dark. Sophia sat on the couch, legs curled beneath her, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. "Where did you go?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Just needed to clear my head." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she took a slow sip of wine. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "Lie." She studied me carefully. Then, setting her glass down, she rose to her feet and walked toward me. "Ethan." I stiffened as she reached out, fingertips brushing against my jaw. I used to crave her touch. Now it sent a cold shiver down my spine. She tilted her head, watching me like she could see straight through me. "You're acting strange." I forced a chuckle. "Just tired." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Would I?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Of course." She searched my face, then leaned in, pressing a soft kiss against my lips. I kissed her back out of instinct, but my mind was screaming. She wasn't Sophia. She was someone else entirely, and I didn't know who. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body on edge. She had known all along. She had sought me out, and now she was lying next to me like none of it mattered. I needed to confront her, but not yet. Not until I knew exactly what she was planning. For now, I would play along. I would act like nothing had changed, and I would wait. Because if Sophia thought she was the only one keeping secrets, she was wrong. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to Sophia's slow, even breathing beside me. My body felt heavy, but my mind refused to rest. The weight of what I had discovered pressed down on my chest, suffocating me. She had known the truth all along, and she had chosen to walk into my life anyway. Every touch, every whisper, every moment we had shared, it had all been deliberate. A calculated act of revenge against the woman who had abandoned her. But where did I fit into her plan? Did she love me, even a little? Or was I just a pawn in her carefully constructed game? I turned my head to look at her. She was beautiful, even in sleep, her dark hair spilling across the pillow, her lips slightly parted. I had traced those lips with my fingers, kissed them with a hunger that now felt misplaced. My stomach twisted as I imagined all the time she had gazed up at me with warmth in her eyes, only to now realize that warmth might have been a lie. A shiver ran down my spine. She had me exactly where she wanted me, and I had no idea what her next move was. Morning came too soon. Sophia stirred beside me, stretching lazily before turning to me with a sleepy smile. "You didn't sleep well," she murmured, her fingers brushing against my cheek. I forced a chuckle, shaking my head. "Too much on my mind," I said, hoping she wouldn't hear the edge in my voice. She studied me for a moment before leaning in, pressing her lips against mine in a lingering kiss. I kissed her back out of habit, but my thoughts were miles away. Over breakfast, she chatted casually about work, about a new restaurant she wanted to try, about the wedding plans we hadn't finalized. I nodded at the right moments, forced a few smiles, but inside, I was unraveling. I needed to confront her, but I couldn't afford to do it without a plan. If she had been playing this game for years, I needed to catch up before making my move. Later that day, I made an excuse about needing to go to the office and drove straight to my mother's house instead. She was waiting for me. I could see it in her eyes the moment she opened the door. Without a word, she stepped aside, letting me in. The house smelled of fresh coffee, but it did nothing to settle my nerves. I followed her into the living room, where she sat down, clasping her hands together tightly. I remained standing, too restless to sit. "I need the truth. All of it," I said, my voice firm. My mother let out a slow breath, nodding. "I told you most of it already," she began, her voice weary. "I was young, foolish. I had an affair. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. Your father was a powerful man. He had a reputation, a family name that couldn't be tarnished. If he had found out, he would have left me. I couldn't let that happen." She looked away, her eyes clouded with something that resembled guilt. "I made a deal with the orphanage. They agreed to take her in under the condition that I supported them financially. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought she would be better off without me." I clenched my fists. "You didn't even check on her?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. My mother flinched. "I did in the beginning, but as time passed, it became harder. Every time I thought about her, I felt ashamed. I convinced myself that leaving her alone was better than showing up in her life and confusing her." She exhaled shakily. "But she found out. Somehow, she found out who I was. And now, she's back." My stomach churned. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Because I thought she would stay away, my mother admitted. I thought if I kept my distance, she would too. I never imagined she would go this far. I raked a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. What is she planning? My mother hesitated. I don't know. But if she spent her whole life resenting me, she's not just here for closure. Be careful, Ethan. She's hurt, and hurt people do dangerous things. I left my mother's house with more questions than answers. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, betrayal. I had spent months loving a woman I didn't really know, a woman who had been lying to me since the day we met. And yet, despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe there was something real between us. That maybe, in the midst of her revenge, she had fallen for me too. But could I afford to take that risk? That night, as I walked back into our apartment, I felt like I was stepping into a stranger's home. Sophia greeted me with a warm smile, acting as if nothing had changed. I made dinner, she said, waving toward the table. I thought we could have a quiet night in. I forced a smile, nodding as I walked over. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering softly. She had put effort into this, which only made my stomach tighten. As we ate, she watched me closely. You've been distant lately, she said after a while, setting her fork down. Is something wrong? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Just work stress, I lied. Big deals coming up, a lot on my plate. She tilted her head, unconvinced. You're a terrible liar, Ethan, she said with a small smirk. My pulse quickened. I'm fine, I said more firmly. Really? She didn't push, but I could tell she didn't believe me. After dinner, she curled up next to me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her out of habit, but my mind was miles away. I needed to figure out my next move. I needed to know what she was after. As she dozed off in my arms, I stared down at her, feeling the weight of my next decision. She thought she had me trapped in her web, but she underestimated me. If she was playing a game, then I was going to start playing too. I didn't sleep that night, even with Sophia curled up next to me, her steady breathing filling the silence. My mind refused to quiet down. I kept replaying everything I had learned, trying to piece together her real intentions. The girl I had fallen in love with, the woman I had planned to marry, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. But I still didn't know how deep the deception ran. How much of our relationship had been real? How much had been part of her plan? Lying next to her felt suffocating, but I forced myself to stay still. If she suspected that I knew the truth, she might change the game before I had a chance to figure out her next move. For now, I needed to be patient. I needed to keep pretending. Morning came too soon. Sophia stirred beside me, stretching lazily before turning to face me. Her dark eyes searched mine. You're distant, she murmured, her fingers brushing over my bare chest. You're not yourself. I forced a chuckle, shaking my head. Just tired. I lied. Too much work. Too many things to handle before the wedding. She smiled, leaning in to press a slow, lingering kiss against my lips. It took everything in me not to flinch. We should take a break, she whispered. Go somewhere. Just the two of us. Leave all this stress behind. The suggestion sent a spike of unease through me. Was this part of her plan? To get me away from everything? To isolate me? My mother's words echoed in my head. Hurt people do dangerous things. I gave her a small smile, careful to keep my expression neutral. That sounds perfect, I said, watching as her eyes softened. We could use some time away. She seemed pleased, and I made a mental note to find out exactly where she wanted to go. I needed to stay ahead of her, to figure out what she was planning before it was too late. The next few days passed in a blur. I played my role perfectly. Loving fiancé, devoted partner, unsuspecting fool. I kissed her, touched her, whispered sweet words into her ear, all while my mind worked tirelessly in the background. Every time she left the apartment, I searched through her things, looking for anything that could give me answers. But she was careful, too careful. There was nothing out of place, no letters, no hidden documents, nothing that could tell me what she was planning. It wasn't until 3 days later that I finally caught a break. Sophia had stepped out to meet a friend. and I used the opportunity to go through her laptop. I knew her password. She had given it to me months ago, never suspecting that one day I would use it against her. My hands were steady as I navigated through her files, my pulse pounding with anticipation. Most of it was normal work documents, travel plans, wedding notes, but then I found a folder buried deep within her personal files. It was labeled with a single word, truth. My stomach twisted as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of documents, old newspaper clippings, orphanage records, and at the center of it all, a file with my mother's name. I opened it, my eyes scanning the contents rapidly. Letters, financial records, even a few photographs. Sophia had been tracking my mother for years. She had followed her life from a distance, collecting every piece of information she could find. Every charity event, every business deal, every move she had made. It was all there. And then I found the letters, handwritten, from my mother. They were old, yellowed with time, but the words were clear. My mother had written to the orphanage, had tried, at least once, to reach out. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want to know if she's safe. Does she ever ask about me? Does she hate me? I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. If she ever wants to find me, I won't turn her away. My breath caught in my throat. She had regretted it. Maybe not at first. Maybe not enough to fight harder, but she had tried. And Sophia had known. She had known all along that my mother had felt remorse. And yet, she had chosen to ignore it. She had spent years building her hatred, convincing herself that my mother had abandoned her without a second thought. She had let that hatred consume her. And now, she was using me to finish what she had started. I shut the laptop and leaned back, my hands gripping the edges of the desk. I needed to think, to process, but I didn't get the chance. The door clicked open behind me. I turned just as Sophia stepped inside, her gaze instantly locking onto the laptop. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. But it wasn't the smile I knew. It wasn't warm, wasn't soft. It was something else entirely. Something dangerous. You found it, she murmured, closing the door behind her. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my expression neutral. Found what? She tilted her head, stepping closer. Don't play dumb, Ethan. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I met her gaze, searching for something, anything, that resembled the woman I had loved. But she was gone. Or maybe she had never been there to begin with. How long have you known? I asked, my voice steady. She smiled again. Since the beginning. A chill ran down my spine. So, this was your plan all along? She let out a soft laugh. Did you really think I fell in love with you by accident? That it was some beautiful coincidence? She took another step closer, her eyes gleaming. I spent my whole life waiting for this moment, Ethan. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up knowing your own mother threw you away like garbage? To watch her live a perfect life while you rot in a place no one wants to be? I swallowed hard. She regretted it. Sophia's expression darkened. Too little, too late. I shook my head. And what about me? Was any of it real? She hesitated. For just a second, something flickered in her eyes. Something almost human. But then it was gone. She leaned in, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered, "Does it matter?" And that was when I knew. It was too late. She had already won. I felt my entire world crumbling around me. Sophia's whisper lingered in my ear, a ghost of a touch that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. Because despite everything, despite the lies, despite the calculated revenge she had built her life around, I had loved her. Or at least I had loved the version of her I thought was real. But the woman standing in front of me wasn't that person. She was something else entirely. Say something, Ethan. Her voice was soft, almost teasing. As if we weren't standing at the edge of destruction. As if she hadn't spent years orchestrating this moment. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. What now? I asked, my voice steady. You've won, right? You got close to me. You fooled me. You made me fall in love with you. So what's next, Sophia? Her smile didn't waver. That depends on you. I let out a hollow laugh. On me? I don't think I ever had a choice in this, did I? She tilted her head. You always had a choice, Ethan. You could have listened to your mother. You could have walked away, but you didn't. You chose me. Because I didn't know who you were, I snapped, my control slipping. And yet, she whispered, stepping closer, you still want me, don't you? I hated that she was right. Even now, with the truth out in the open, my body still reacted to her. My heart still ached for the version of her that had never really existed. She reached up, brushing her fingers along my jaw. You can hate me, Ethan, but it doesn't change the fact that you love me, too. I caught her wrist before she could touch me again, my grip tight. Love built on lies isn't love at all. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Something raw, maybe even hurt, but it was gone before I could be sure. Then what do you want to do? She asked, her voice softer now. Turn me in? Expose me? Destroy me the way I planned to destroy your mother? I stared at her, searching for the answer. I had thought I wanted revenge, that the moment I found out the truth, I would want to ruin her the way she had tried to ruin my family. But standing here, looking at the woman I had spent so many nights holding, so many days loving, I realized I didn't want that. I wanted the truth. I wanted to know if there had ever been something real between us. Did you ever love me? I asked quietly. Sophia didn't answer right away. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she exhaled slowly. I didn't plan to, she admitted. But somewhere along the way, I think I did. It wasn't the confession I wanted. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even enough. But it was the closest thing to the truth I was ever going to get. I let go of her wrist and stepped back. Her eyes darkened. So that's it? You're walking away? What else is there to do, Sophia? My voice was tired now. I'm not going to destroy you. But I can't love you either. Not after this. She didn't stop me when I walked past her. She didn't reach for me, didn't beg, didn't fight. She just stood there, silent as I left. And as I stepped out of the apartment, the home we had built together, I realized that, in the end, she hadn't won. She had lost. Because revenge had consumed her so completely that she had destroyed the only real thing she had ever had. And she knew it.